Hello guys, welcome to my YouTube channel. So in this video what we look at is how to create forms using React. So forms are an integral part of our applications, right? So if we look at most projects, we have a lot of forms like sign in forms, sign up forms, contact forms, and all kinds of forms. So forms are one way of taking data from users, and this data is pretty important. When handling forms, we have to take look at different kinds of forms like email, password, and checkbox or radio buttons, etc. And we have to consider validations for these forms, because if we are using email, we need to have some kind of email validation, and we need to have some kind of password validation, and all those kinds of things. So handling forms is pretty complex. So for this we need some kind of a library that can help us to achieve this easily. So in React we have such a library called Formik. So Formik is a very good library which will help us with handling forms. So in this video what we'll look at is like we'll go into creation of basic form with React, and we will look at the disadvantages of those forms, and then we will move into creating forms using Formik. So let's not waste time and get into the coding. So before that, please subscribe to my channel, and please click on the bell icon so that you get notified when new videos arrive. So I'm using Visual Studio as my code editor. So for initializing the project, we will use npx create react app, and I am going to name the project React Forms project. Now let's wait for it to install. So it will take some time, so I will just fast forward it. It's going to take some time for you. Okay, now the installation is done. So we will just change into that React Forms project directory, so we can use cd for that. I'll open it in a new window using code and the current directory dot. Now let's just start the project. For that we can type npm start. So our React project is available at localhost 3000. Let's check that in the browser. Yes, we can see the boilerplate that we get from create react app. Now let's go and make changes to that. On the left side you can see the folder structure. So I'll just open the source, and here we have some folders. So I'll just go into the index.js file, and this is our main file. And yes, you can see the app component is there, and we'll go to the app.js. Here we have the basic boilerplate that we see when we create the project. So what we'll do is, we'll clear out that, and we will put in a fragment instead of that. Now we will go into the app.css, and we'll clear everything from that also. And index.css, okay, we can clear that as well. Now here what we will do is, we will do a CSS reset using margin 0, padding 0, and box size in border box, and we will apply this to all element. So this will actually reset the browser, so that this will actually reset the CSS so that in every browser it looks same. Because usually the browser applies some kind of style. So if we give the CSS reset, then the styles will be uniform across different browsers like Chrome, Firefox, etc. Now let's go into the app.js again. We'll remove the logo. So the logo import we can remove, as well as we can delete the logo. Now if you look, we get a blank page because we just have a empty fragment. So in the source folder we'll create a new folder called components. So here we'll add our components. So first component that we are going to create is called the basic form.js. So this will contain our basic form. So what we can do is like we can import React inside it. So we'll import React from React. So we will create a functional component. So let's create the component. Let's name it basic form, and we'll use an arrow function to create the component. So the component will currently return a heading basic form, so that we can check whether the component is working. So let's export the component. So we can use export default basic form. Now in the app.js we'll import the form. So let's import the basic form component from the basic form folder inside the components. Now we will return that. So we don't need the fragment anymore. We just have that one component. So we can return that component. Now let's check. Yeah, we get the basic form heading. So our component is working now. Now we'll go back to the basic form component and we'll remove that heading from there. Now we can add a div. So this div will cover our form component. So we'll give this div a class name of container. So this will be the container inside which our form will reside, and we can initialize the form tag. So inside the form tag there will be another div. So this will be the particular field that we are going to use, the form field. So this we can give form control. So this will carry the label as well as the input of that particular input. And so the label we can give HTML4 equal to email for this label. So normally we use for, but in React to get that functionality of the for attribute we use HTML4 prop. So here we'll name the label as email, and the input we can actually use the type as email. So first we'll give the placeholder as enter email, and we'll give the type of email. We can also give a name of email. So name is something important. Yeah, that will do, I guess, for the one input. So we'll copy that again and we'll paste it, and we'll change the email to password. In all the places we have email, we'll change that to password. So the label is now password, placeholder is enter password, type will be of password. So this will not show the text, instead it will show the star signs. Instead it will show the asterisk, and the name is password. Now what we need is a submit button actually. So submit button we can add after the password form, and we can use the button tag for this, and we give it a value of submit. The type will be of submit, then only the button will act as a submit button. Then we will add a class name of btn for the button, and for the submit button we will add a special class name of btn submit. So every button will have a class name of btn, and for especially for the submit button we will have some additional css. For that we are going to use btn submit. So now if we look, our form looks bad, right? So actually the we have the email password form and also the submit button. So next thing we need to do is style this and get our form to look good. So we'll go into the app.css. Here is where we will do all the styling. So we will only add global styling in this case, because like we don't have too much, so we'll do the styling globally at app.css. So first we'll style the container, which is our main div. For this we'll give a background color of F2, F2, F2. so that's some gray, so it is a light gray. Now width I'll give something like a 500 pixels. Margin we'll set it as auto so that it is centered horizontally. We'll give some margin top, I think we'll give something like 50 pixels, and we'll give a padding of 20 pixels so that the form looks better. Yeah, now itself it has a container and it looks a little bit better, right? So, and the container is centered, so that is something good. Now we'll style the forms. So in the basic form, if you look, we have class name of form control. We'll style this, and we'll also style the label and input using the form control itself. So the form control styles actually, so we'll first give a margin. So we'll give a margin bottom of 16 pixels so that there's some distance between the forms. Now what we need to style the label inside the form control, and this label actually is inline, so we'll make it as a display of block so that there's separation between the label and input, and we'll give margin bottom of 8 pixels. So if we look now, they are in separate lines. The label as well as the input is in separate lines now. Next, let us style the input. So inside the form control input, we will give them some style. So for the input of type text, and also for the input of type password. So if you want, you can give it as simply input, but I prefer doing it separately with according to the type. So here we can give a width of 100% so that it will stretch to the container. We'll give a padding of 12 pixels so that there's some distance inside the field, input field, and we'll give a border of 1 pixel solid as CCC, which is a type of gray. Now let's look better. Okay, so our input type is actually email. Instead that we have not given any style for input type of email, so let's add that as well. Yeah, now the input looks good, and the input has filled the container as well as there is some spacing inside the input. Now let's go and make some style changes to the submit button. So for the submit button, if you look, we have a class name of button as well as button submit. So button is for the common buttons, so we'll first style that. Here we'll give some padding of 12 pixels so the button looks good. We'll give a background color of brown. A color inside it will be white, so ash FFF will do that, and we'll give a border of 0 pixels. Yeah, 0, instead of 0 we can put it as none, so no border. And we'll give a cursor of pointer so that when we hover over it, there's a cursor that looks like it's a link. So yeah, if you can see, it now acts as a link. Now when we hover, there's no change, so we don't feel it like a button. So if when we hover, we need to make some color changes or something so that it feels more like a button, and also you would like to fill that button fully, so we'll give a new style. First we'll add the hover style to the button. So btn and colon hover will give us the hover styles, and we'll give a background color of there's color called RGB 149 35 35. This is a slightly darkish version of the brown we have taken. So this I have selected using the color selected inside the VS Code. If you want, you can do the color selector and change it. So I'll change that back to the one I have, 149 35 35. Yeah, now let's look. When you hover, look, there's a dark color when we hover, so that looks good. When we click also, there is some dark color and some outline, so now it looks good, right? Now we need to give a style for the submit button so that it fills. So we will add the btn submit class as well. For this we will give a width of 100%. I think that will do. Yeah, now the button looks good, right? So it is also filling. The form now looks way better than what we had initially, right? So that's good. Maybe we can give some margin top for the button. So margin top of something like 12 pixels, that will do. Yeah, now there's some separation between the input and button. Now if we type something like we can type the email and password. If we type this, shows the asterisk. So our form looks good, right? Now let's look at how forms are handled in React. So how we can create basic React forms. So for that, if it's a class component, we can use set state, and we can maintain the state of the different form inputs. And if it's a functional component, we will use state. So the form handling is done through this state management techniques in normal React. So if you are using something like Redux or something, you can use that as well for handling the state. So we are going to create a functional component using this. So we will be making use of useState. So let's go into our basic form component. So we need to import useState from React. So let's import that. Now we will set a state for the email. So using the useState hook, we can use email as well as set email function, so that we can set that state. And useState, the initial value will be nothing, so we'll give an empty string. Similarly, we'll use password as the state for setting the password, and set password as the function to set that password. And we'll use the useState, and here we'll give the empty string as well. Now for the input, we need a prop called onChange. So onChange prop will take in a function. So this will be something like a handler function. So this is similar to the event listeners in normal JavaScript. So these are called synthetic events. So synthetic events are something that looks uniform across browsers. So from that we will get the event, and we will set the email to e.target.value. So this is normally like what we do in JavaScript DOM manipulation. And also we have a value prop that we will set to the email, that email state that we have declared on top. We'll just copy this and paste it in the password as well. So we need to change the function to set password and the value to password. Now to submit the form, we can make use of the onSubmit handler in form. So onSubmit prop, we can pass in and handle submit handler. So we'll declare the handle submit function. So we can alert the email and password state that we get. So we'll use json.stringify and pass in email and password as the object keys and values. Now let's check whether this form works. So we'll pass in the email as johndoe@mail.com. and password is 12345678 or something, and we'll submit that. Yeah, yes, we can get, you can see the alert, right, with the email and password. But we could see that the page reloaded, and we also got the query of email and password at the URL. So the default behavior of the submit function is to reload the page. Basically it submits the form to that page itself. So that's why this is happening. So we don't want this in a single page application like the React project. So we can change that. For that, what we will do is, like in the handle submit handler, we will get an event just like the event we got on change or something. And with this event, we get something called prevent default. So using that prevent default will stop that page from reloading. So let's try that out again. So johndoe@yopmail.com for the email and 123456 for the password. Now let's submit. We get the alert when we can see the values. When you click on OK, page doesn't get reloaded. So that's successful now. Now what we need is, like, after the submission process, we need to reset the form. So that is what we need to do now. So in this case, we can just reset the form by using set email to an empty tag and set password to another empty string. So now let's go back and let's try again. johndoe@yopmail.com, and we'll type in the password again. When we submit, we get the alert. When we click on OK, it's reset now. So we get the basic form functionality with this, and this was not that tough, right? We just needed to declare a state for email and password. We used that state and we set the email and password, and once on the on change we set the value from the input, and once that event was submitted, we alerted the value, and once it gets over, we reset the form. But for handling forms, we need much more. So we need to do form validations, we need to handle different kinds of forms. If we are going to do that with React, it's going to be tough. So that's why we need a library like Formik. Let's look at some disadvantages that we have if we use React for form handling. So basically, this is a repetitive process. We need to repeat that setting and handling state. There's no uniformity. It means that each developer will be developing it differently, right, if you use direct React. And error handling is something that we have to do our own. So this will become a tedious process. And another thing I find is that the scalability depends on the developer's skill. If the developer is good enough, he can make a good form handling logic. Otherwise, it is not like an easy thing. So now we look into how we can make forms using Formik. So for that, first we'll install the Formik library. So it is easy install. Just type npm install Formik. Now the library is installed, so we will create another component to make the Formik form. So we'll name the component Formik form. So what we'll do here is, like, we'll copy whatever there is in the basic form and we'll paste that in the Formik form component. So we'll change the name to Formik form, and also the export default we can change to Formik form. So instead of the handling with React, we will be using Formik form to handle. So let's import that in the app.js as well. So we can import Formik form from the components Formik form file, and we will return Formik form instead of basic form, and we'll comment that component out. So let's start the project again. So let's look at the browser, and it works similarly to the basic form. Now we will go into the Formik form component. Now we don't need to handle with the use state. So what we'll do is we'll remove the declarations for that, and we'll also remove the handle submit function. We also don't need the use state now, so we can remove that from the import as well. Now we will import Formik. So we will import something from the Formik library. So Formik has so many exports. One, we will use the Formik component. So this is the main component in Formik, and this is what should be at the top of the form that we are going to handle. So whatever the form we have, that should be inside this Formik component. So it is actually a context based component. So it makes use of the context API in React, and also it uses something called the render pattern. So render pattern is a famous React pattern. So let's use that Formik component, and we will enclose our form inside that Formik component. So now we have the Formik component initialized. So the Formik component takes in some props. So one of the props is initial values. So initial values are the values of the form inputs we need. So these are like the state we have given, like the email, password, and whatever state you need to handle, right? So that is the initial values. So here we have email and password. So we will give the email as an empty value and password as an empty value. So this is our initial values. Next we need to handle the form when it is submitted, right? So for that we have an onSubmit prop. So it is an handler function. So it gives in some props. Basically we get values, actions, etc. from that. So values are the values that we get from the input, and actions are some actions we can perform after the submit function is done. We will alert the values here. So we will use json.stringify, and we will use some null and true for the formatting it. And from the actions we have so many actions. So we will put the actions.set submitting, and we will put make that as false. So set submitting is something like when we click on submit, the form will be submitted and the set submitting value will be true, and after some time we need to make it false. So this will be useful in when we are submitting our form to an API or something. So when we submit to an API, we can disable that button for some time, and after that we can use this set submitting action and set it to false. To simulate that, we have used the set timeout and set it to 1 second. So the render pattern, it works like what we say, like arrow function. So we can copy whatever inside that form, and we will paste that form inside the render pattern. So it is just like rendering a component, and we get some props which is we get from the Formik. So the actions we can actually destructure and set it to set submitting as, or no, we can set it back. If we need the completion, then we need it actions as well. Okay, the props maybe we can destructure. So from the props we get values, errors, touched, handle change, handle blur, and handle submit. So this will be the function that is called when we submit, and is submitting. So is submitting will be set using that set submitting action, and the values are the values we get from the inputs. Errors, touched, etc. and handle blur are useful when error handling. So we will look at that later. Yeah, so now on the on change we will give the handle change prop that we got, and in both the on change we will change that, and the value actually should come from the values prop. So that we set as values dot email and values dot password. So values dot email, and similarly values dot password. Now if you look, the name is important. So the name and the initial value names should be same. Now we can use the is submitting. So is submitting is as I said, when the action dot set submitting is done, it will be changed to true and false. So it is used when submitting. So this will be useful when you need to disable the button once it is submitted. So we can set the disable to is submitting. So once the submit is clicked, it will change to true, and we ourselves make it false. Now we need to give some style for the buttons disabled. So button disabled state, we can give a background color of #777, which will be a gray color. Now if we just click on submit, it turns to disabled and we get that alert. Let's look at it again. So we'll give johndoe@yopmail.com and we'll give the password. When we submit, we get alert after 1 second. Yes, you can see we get the email and password, and okay, it's done. Now we need to reset the form as we did for the normal React form, right? So this is also easy using this. So we have an action called reset form, and here we can reset the values. So here we can do reset values, errors, etc. So we are going to reset the values of email and password to empty string. Let's go back. Let's try it again. So johndoe@yopmail.com and password is 123456. We'll submit. After a second, the result comes. Okay, now it's reset. So that's working. So we got the functionality as similar to our basic form. So that's good. But so this is okay. So this is almost similar to what we have in the basic form. So what are the other advantages of using a Formik? So now what we have is we'll pass in another so this is called validate. Here we can validate the inputs. So here we get the values, and we'll return an error object, errors object, and let's declare that errors object. So first it's an empty object. Now from the values we'll check whether the email is set. If it is not set, we'll give the error an email key of email is required. Else we have to check whether the email is valid or not. So for this we need some kind of regular expression. So for that we'll go into the Formik documentation. So Formik documentation gets started. You will see an example where they use the email. So there you can see a test that is done with a regular expression. So we can paste that itself. So if that is false, then the email, we can say it's an invalid email. Similarly, we will check for the password. So if the password is not set, values.password is not set, we will set the errors.password as password is required. Else if the password's length is less than 8, so we need the password to be at least 8 characters long. If it is less than 8, we will set it as password must be at least 8 characters or something like that we can set. So password must be at least, at least 8 characters. So now we can make use of the other things like errors, touched, handle blur, etc. So we will use an on blur prop that is there in input, and we will give the handle blur. So this happens when the input is out of focus, that is it is blurred, then this event will occur. So this is good for validation and stuff. Now we need to show the error message, right? So inside that form control div, we'll add another HTML tag called small, and we will give an error. So if you look, we can see that there is an error with small tag, and for the class name we will give error. So this we have to use everywhere. So let's go to the app.css and add the error class. Here mainly we just need to set the color to red, nothing else. We'll keep it that simple. Now we can see the red error. What we'll do is we need to show the error, right? So we can make use of the errors and touched values from the Formik. So we will show the errors.email. So this will have all the errors from the email, and similarly we can copy and paste that into the password, and we'll change that to errors.password. Now if we go back and just reload, now when we type itself, that errors are shown. So but that is not that good, right? We need to show that only if the password field is touched, or when we click on submit or something like that, right? So what we'll do is we'll make use of the touched property. So we'll check whether there is an error in the email, and also if that is touched. So everything will have that particular state. So all the state are maintained by Formik, we don't have to worry about it. So we'll check whether the email is set, whether the email is touched. That means touched occurs when on the onBlur event. So similarly we'll set that for the password as well. So let's copy that password and error and paste it in the email as well. And let's change that password errors.password to email. Yeah, now when we type, the error is not shown, but when we focus on the next password, the error is shown. So that is better. So this error is something that is coming from our HTML, because we have set an email type of text field. Now let's type johndoe@yopmail.com and we'll type the password, and we can see the different errors changing, and when we submit, it works. When we submit, simply we get the error. Now submitting occurs, so that's also good. So everything is getting taken care of by Formik. But if you look, our error validation is somewhat lengthy, right? And it's custom. So if we are going to do like this, what's the difference between React and using Formik, right? So for that we have another library which we can use with Formik called yep. So we will install that. The installation is simple, just type npm install yep. So let's wait for the installation to complete. Now let's start the project again using npm start. Now we can go and import the yep library. So we can import star as yep from yep. So yep is a pretty easy library. You can look at its documentation, it is pretty easy. So we will remove the validate prop from the Formik component, and instead of the validate we can use another thing called validation schema. So Formik actually works well with yep, and if we can directly provide the yep validation using this validation schema. So basically our form state will be an object, right? So we will make use of yep.object, and inside that we will provide the email as our key, and this we can make use of yep and string method. So this check whether the email is a string, and we will also use chaining and set email. So this will check whether that email is an email, and we also chain another method called required. So this type of method chaining helps in making the validations pretty easy. You can just read and understand, like we are first checking a string, then an email, then the required, and similarly password also we can check for the string and required. And also for the max, right? Max, I mean the min value. So minimum 8 characters we can provide min. So there are many methods like this in yep which you can make use of. For knowing this, you can just go into the yep's documentation and you can find it. Now let's look at our browser. When we submit, we still see the error, and we see an error value, email must be a valid, and the password is a required field, and everything like that. This is not something we have given. This is automatically taken from the yep validation schema and provided by Formik. So this integration with the yep library is what makes Formik the most useful form handling library to me. So the validation is now pretty easy, right? So if you want to give custom messages, you can just give a parameter as this email is invalid, and if it is something like a min 8, you can give it as a second argument, like please provide at least 8 characters or something. So for the custom message you just have to do that. Now if you look when we type the email is invalid, which is a custom message we have given, and password also please provide at least 8 characters, so that is also something custom we have given. And when there's no error, when we submit, same thing happens and we get the alert. So the validation has become pretty easy with yep. Now the thing you may be thinking is like, so if we look at input, all the input feels like similar, right? So it also feels like a repetition, like we are always giving the on blur and value, and also the error handling, we have to give all the time this errors.password and touch.password and errors.email, touch.email, then we have to check that. And also this is you are thinking this is also a repetitive process, so what's the advantage of using Formik? So in Formik we have some other components. So one is the field component, a form component, and the error message component. So we will replace we'll replace the form component first with the form from Formik. Now we don't need to provide that on submit because it will be automatically taken care of by Formik. And in the inputs we can actually change to the field component in Formik. So all the inputs will be changed to a field, and we don't need to provide the on change, on blur, value, etc. All this will be automatically handled by Formik. We just have to give the type, name, and placeholder. So we'll change that for the password as well. We just have to give the name, type, and placeholder. So that is really easy, right? Now for the errors also we have something like this. We have the error message component. So we can give the error message component, and we can provide the name, which is the name of the values, initial values we are given, right? So we can give the name as email. Same in the password, we can change that to password. Now the error message, let's check that. We'll reload and we'll press. Okay, the error message is now in black color and not like our earlier error message. So what we'll do is like, let's go and change. So let's give it a component. So there's a component prop, and we are going to give the component as small. So small is what we used, right? So we can provide that. If you want, you can provide other components like div, etc. So we'll also provide the class name. So class name prop is also there. So we'll provide the class name of error we have declared in the app.css. Now let's submit. Yeah, we get the error, right? So that error looks good. Now it's in red. So now if you look with field and error message, the code is reduced by a ton, right? So let's check with the email, johndoe@yopmail.com, password 123456, submit, and it's submitted. So yeah, so that's working fine. So Formik has made life easy for us when using forms, and this is very easy as compared to handling forms with React. So now let's take a look at what all advantages we had when we used Formik, right? So if you look, Formik was very easy to use. We can use that Formik component, field component, error message component, and the validation was done. So if we use, that was pretty easy to use. So Formik is performant because all this state is managed internally in that Formik prop. So it makes use of that context, and that it is very performant. It's not something like we are handling in Redux. And Formik is lightweight. It's only 13 KB when the minified size is only 13 KB. So it is a lot less than other alternatives. The repetitiveness is avoided. You like making use of all these things. The repetitiveness is not there. It is scalable. Like you can scale it to anything. We just need to use those field the Formik component and the validation, and it also works with basic and dynamic forms. So the form we saw now was basic. We'll look at dynamic forms in the next video, and the form validation with yep, that's one of the best features of Formik. So guys, if you like the video, please like, share and subscribe to my channel, and click on the bell icon so that you get notified when new videos come. There are much more videos to come in the Formik series, and we will build a full form in the next video.